everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Growth Design Podcast. It is incredible to be here again. And today we've got a very special guest. His name is Andy. Hello, Andy.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh, well, thank you. And I've got my co host as well, Emmanuel.
Hey guys, good to be here.
Okay, so we are going to get started because today's conversation we're going to be talking about the growth equation, early users, behavioral nudges, and building your A team for growth. Now, the reason you will find out very quickly why I said our guest is pretty special. So, in case you know nothing about Andy Bud, well, buckle up and get ready. So, yeah, welcome, Andy. Your career has been incredible from co founding Fundec, launching UX London, leading design, founding ClearLeft, and now you are a venture capitalist at Seedcamp. And it is as if you have seen design from every angle. So let's go back to the beginning. We want to hear from you. What was your journey into and within design?
Thank you. I'm really, really pleased to be here and I'm really looking forward to this chat. I don't want to spend too much time talking about my origin story because I could go on forever, but I guess I discovered the web in the mid 90s. I was traveling around the world after university and I was traveling through a lot of Southeast Asian countries and I was using email to keep in touch with friends and I was looking up websites to decide where to go next. And two things happened to me. One, I was in a sort of a mail office in Indonesia and they had a bank of computers I was using. And I was there on my Hotmail and the person sat next to me was on this really weird screen. It was black and it had angle brackets. It looked like something from the Matrix. And so when they were leaving, I said, "Oh, excuse me, like, what are you doing?" And this person said, "Well, I'm building my own website." This was like well before the term blog had been invented. And I know it sounds really naive, but back then I didn't think that was something an individual could do. I thought it had to be done by a big company, a tech team, and so I just thought, wow, you can build your own website. And so I made a little mental note. When I go back to the UK, I'll learn how to do this. I also then happened to be sort of one evening sat at a hostel in Singapore. And there were two people there. There was this French guy. When I met the French guy, I was like, "Where have you come from?" He said, "I've just cycled from Paris." And I was like, "Oh, where are you going tomorrow?" "Back to Paris." So like the guy had cycled all the way across the whole of Europe and Asia to spend a day in Singapore and then cycle back, which was bonkers. But I met this other guy and I was like, "Well, what do you do?" And he was like, "Well, I'm a web designer." I'm like, "What's that?" He was like, "Well, I do this thing called HTML. It's really easy. Any idiot can do it. I get paid a ton of money and I do it for 6 months of the year and I travel for 6 months." And I was like, "Yep, I like the sound of that." I'd always been quite techie. Like I was the kid in school that when everyone else was running outside and playing football or kiss chase or whatever, like I was like in on my BBC with a couple of other nerdy kids, like making a little, turtle plotter move around and draw shapes on a bit of paper. And then I was the first kid in my school that had a Spectrum, Sinclair Spectrum. And so I used to kind of get magazines and I mean, this is going to sound so old fashioned, but back in the day, you used to get a magazine that had the code of the game written down and you'd spend like 2 hours just copying it out. And then you'd get a semicolon in the wrong place and it wouldn't load. And so, this is how old I am. This is how long I've been doing kind of, techie stuff. And so when I found that you could actually build websites, I thought this is cool. So I came back to the UK, I bought a cheap little computer and I would sit in my local Waterstones coffee shop reading all the books there was possible about the web, which back in the day was like maybe 10 books, about kind of like web design and HTML and all this kind of stuff. And I just got really into it. And I joined a little agency, I got pretty good, I was doing a lot of Flash back in the day. And then I discovered this thing called CSS. Now, when I discovered CSS, it was a theoretical language. There was no browser in existence that supported it. So I started reading up about this thing and thinking, this is cool. And then along came the very first browser that supported CSS, IE 5.5 on the Mac, which it turned out was built partly by a guy called Tantek Celik, who later became a really good friend of mine. And that was the first browser that allowed you to lay out a page purely in CSS. And so I did this, and I discovered that I had built the third ever CSS website in the UK. And the person that built the second ever one just lived around the corner in Brighton. And so we got together and we got chatting and we were like talking about this new thing called CSS. And I was writing a book at the time. I wrote a book called CSS Mastery, which was the third ever book about CSS design. And for a short while when it launched, it was outselling Harry Potter. It was quite a popular book. And still to this day, I meet people when they hear my name like, hold on, are you that guy that wrote that book 20 years ago that I learned how to do web design from? And I was like, yeah, that's probably me. So I wrote this really, really early web design book called CSS Mastery. And I met this guy called Jeremy Keith, and we got on well, and we decided to set up a company together. And that company was ClearLeft. The name comes from a CSS declaration. But we realized that CSS wasn't a unique thing. It wasn't going to be special for long. It was going to be really quickly the way that everyone built things. So you didn't want to start a company being the CSS people because you'd lose your advantage. But there was another thing I was doing, like in my company. While everybody at the time, all the designers I knew were just like, they'd get a brief, they'd open up Photoshop and they'd start designing. I did all these really weird things. I would talk to customers. I would create these things called wireframes and have people test them and see how the product worked. I would do this like really weird thing called information architecture that very few people had heard of. There was like one book at the time called the Polar Bear book by Lou Rosenfeld, and not really many people. And so I was like, oh, I'm doing this kind of really, really weird thing. And a couple of years earlier, this company in the US called Adaptive Path had set up an agency. And they set up what was arguably the world's first UX agency. And I was like, I like the sound of that. UX is cool. And I looked around and I couldn't find any other agencies in the UK that did this thing called UX. So I said, like, let's ClearLeft be the first ever UX agency in the UK. And so we started that in 2005. And we built it from a little tiny agency in Brighton to a company that, you know, had quite a global impact. We were speaking all over the world in big conferences and events. As you say, like, we founded a couple of conferences, Deconstruct, UX London, and Leading Design. You know, we ended up working with loads of really, really amazing brands, you know, companies like in the US, like Mozilla, and then in the UK, lots of really well-known brands like Virgin Atlantic. And we redesigned Penguin Books, and we worked with all the big energy providers like British Gas and British Telecom and the BBC. And so all of these sort of massive institutions. And so, yeah, I started in, you know, just as a backpacker wanting to create a little blog for my travels. And then eventually I ended up kind of working in all these amazing household names. So it was a really, really amazing journey.
It's incredible, honestly. Okay, let's get into the meat of it. What was then the prompt that caused you to go from building all these design focused companies into then supporting them as an investor? What caused the shift?
One of the things that's really driven me is, like, I'm a huge fan of design. I believe design is really important. I think design is really powerful. I come from a generation of people that really value user centricity, you know, building products that work, talking to customers, understanding their needs, listening to them, and then building that into the products we build. But one of the things I found during my time at ClearLeft is a lot of the people I spoke to, like, a lot of the designers got it, but a lot of the business people didn't. A lot of the CTOs, CEOs, they just thought design was making something look pretty. They didn't understand it was about solving a problem. They didn't understand it was about solving a business problem. They didn't get that, like, one of the reasons companies like Apple have done so well is because of their design capabilities. And so I spent a lot of my time trying to educate people. When I actually left ClearLeft, I sold the company. We actually became employee owned. So ClearLeft still exists, but it's now owned by the employees. But when I left, like, I started doing coaching. I still do. I coach heads, directors, and VPs of product and design. If anyone's listening and they want some coaching, give me a shout. But the conversations I was having with my coaching clients was similar to the challenges that I was facing when I was designing for people, which was, you know, how do I, Andy, as a design leader, get my boss to really appreciate design? How do I show the impact that design can have on the company, on our clients, on our bottom line? And so I spent a lot of my time, and still do, helping those design leaders navigate that, how they can improve the quality of their output, how they can really lean into having a business impact, and how they can bring the rest of their stakeholders along on the journey. But one of the things I realized is the reason that they're having this problem partly is because the company wasn't built with design at its core. You know, it was maybe built by an engineer, or it was maybe built by a business person. And actually, a lot of the early success was often despite their lack of design rather than because of their lack of design. And so when you hire your first designer and your second designer and your first head of design, they're already facing a uphill battle because the company has been successful without design. And that's something that a lot of designers really struggle with, like the fact that you can have a successful company without design.
Yeah.
But you're facing a headwind. And so what I decided to do, well, I mean, this has been a kind of part of my career or my life. Like, one of the reasons I've done conferences is because, if I'm an agency person and I can build 10 websites a year, I help 10 people, 10 companies, maybe thousands, tens of thousands of millions of their customers. But if I speak at a conference, if I organize a conference, maybe I can also help 5,000 other design leaders build better products and services and have a bigger impact. And so a lot of it's about impact. And so I kind of realized, well, as well as my coaching, what would I need to do to make sure that design was embedded from day one? And the best way to do that is either to start your own business, which I did with my agency, or to be part of that formation. So I kind of realized, well, hey, look, if I come as a VC, if I turn up to the meetings with these entrepreneurs with effectively a big kind of suitcase of cash and push that over and say, hey, look, here's $500,000 or $1 million, go away and build your business, they're much more likely to listen to me. And so when I start talking to them, I very rarely talk about design, sort of big D design, but I'll ask them questions around who their audience is, who their target market is, what their target experience is like. I'll try and get them thinking around, what it's like to use the product for the first time as a user that's never experienced it, because all of these founders are super users, but their first time user customers are not super users. And so trying to get them in the mindset of the user. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help them build a business that understands design, is a business multiplier, and not just a thing that makes it look pretty. I want to be there when they're hiring their first designer, so I can help them hire a good designer. I want to be there when they're hiring their first product manager, so I can help them hire a product manager that understands design. And so really, I'm trying to get design baked into an organization from day one, so that when in 3 or 4 years' time, my next coaching client, head of design comes to me, they're not saying, Andy, my boss doesn't get design. They're saying, Andy, the company I'm working at really does get design. I need your help to make the ship go faster. So that's the kind of the logic behind being an investor now. It's still delivering the same mission, but just from a different angle.
Everything you've described also is what forms the formation of group design, really, as we see it today, right? Which is that multiplier on top of whatever exists. Like, yes, you can be successful without design, so to speak, but imagine how much further you could go with design, right? Now, and you've been a vocal advocate of design for so long, of group design. And one might say, like, you've talked about it in the context of it being the future of product design. So from your experience and perspective, how would you define group design? Why is it so crucial? And especially when you think about it in the context of early stage startups.
I've been a huge fan of the growth design movement since it started. I've known Molly for a while. I've a member of your community. I don't talk much, but I am a signed up member of the Slack community. So I think that the way that user experience design and user centered design is often practiced is around the creation of new value. So I'm a designer. I talk to some users about some unmet needs that they have, and then I come up with a feature that adds capability to the system I'm building. It's a new ability that the product's never had before. And a lot of the time, when we designers are delivering this new capability, it takes quite a while for that capability to be adopted and to be used. And so we kind of find ourselves on a bit of a treadmill. Add a new feature, add a new feature, add a new feature. And, that can be really interesting. Like, a lot of people love working in these sort of feature-driven teams where they're kind of delivering new capabilities all the time. But often the business doesn't value that new capability creation because it's not being framed in a kind of a business context. So one of the things I always say, I'm actually speaking at a conference in Denmark in a few weeks' time, and the subject matter is this. It's been something I've been banging on about for the last 4 or 5 years, is that in order to raise our profile as designers, we can't just be delivering features off a roadmap, because the business has already decided what those features are, and we can kind of embellish them, we can improve them, but we are seen as a delivery function. However, the real value, or one of the real values design can have, is to lean into helping our business partners deliver on their business goals. And what are some of the obvious business goals? Well, if you look at the kind of the typical kind of a startup sort of sign up funnel, pirate metrics funnel, you know, our business partners want to acquire more customers. And we can do that by using our knowledge of psychology to make it easier for people to sign up, to make it clearer by having much better positioning, by working on the promotional website to make it as smooth experience as possible. Once people have decided to click that button, we can help them get on board. We can make the sign up as clear as possible. We can onboard them in a way that they hit the ground running. We can help them get time to value as quick as possible. So rather than signing up and disappearing, they sign up and they get that first aha moment, and they get their second aha moment. And then suddenly something that could have easily just sort of fitted away ends up becoming a core part of their new behavior, their new routine, their new workflow. Designers are really, really good at doing this stuff. Obviously, then people are using the product every day, and then we can add value. We can find out what parts of the product are not being used or not being used as much, and we can kind of encourage that use. We can find new things for them to do. And then even at the end of the process, when it's time for people to leave, we can make that offboarding as smooth as possible. And so I think there's lots of opportunities throughout the process where design isn't just adding new features, but is solving the business problems that the business really, really cares about. And we can solve them in a way that is not something that is theoretical and happens in 3 or 4 months' time, but that we can measure, we can map, we can see, we can come up with a hypothesis, we can deliver that hypothesis, we can tweak it, and we can show within a few weeks, we've done X, this is the output. And this is a key thing that most designers don't have, is they don't have that kind of loop. They don't have that ability to say, I did this, and this is the action that we had, because they're often not part of that team that is measuring. They're not expected to take the thing that they shipped and improve it. They're built onto the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And so I can't remember which one of the, there's lots of people that talk about kind of growth design. It might have been Molly, it might have been somebody else. This idea that feature teams are creating new capabilities. Growth teams are allowing existing capabilities to shine. They're allowing users of the current system to discover those features, that functionality, and make the most out of them. And after all, why would you want to create new capabilities if you've got a dozen different capabilities that your product already has and people aren't using them, people aren't finding them, people aren't getting the value? And so I often, when I talk to sort of founders, I think it's really difficult to get founders to kind of see design in the way that we see it. I think they still need the feature teams. I still think they need a product manager delivering, product description diagrams. I think there still needs to be this kind of new feature delivery. But if you can take a small number of people and say, hey, look, you're going to be like this sort of strike team, and you're going to work on improving all these areas, all of these pinch points in the different parts of the funnel. And you quickly see activation go from 5% to 6% to 7% to 8% to 9%. That's the point where the product leader, the engineering leader, the CEO goes, oh, I didn't realize that's what design could do. I thought design was just making it look pretty. But you have just doubled the number of users coming to my system. You've doubled the number of people activating. Give me more of that. And so I think that then allows all of design to raise up. Because if growth designers, they're at the head of this, I think they're at the kind of like the sharp end. If they are the ones that can prove within a 2 or 3 week sprint that they can deliver value, then that expectation then filters down to all the designers in the system. And the founders we work with will go, oh, well, maybe I wonder what these other people over here can do. So I think growth design is a really vital, important part of the new mix of skills that we have in our industry.
Definitely. I can agree less with that line of thoughts. Obviously, it's a no-brainer definitely for even every designer to just want to, fit themselves into that circle, because why are you designing something if you don't know the impact of whatever you're designing? What impact does it have on the business? So it's a no-brainer for every designer, definitely. Given your deep understanding of the design world, from being a CSS guru to being an investor, you've touched pretty much every part of design and even engineering. What would you say is the biggest challenge in terms of design that you've observed that startups struggle with, particularly in their early stages, and probably if you put the lens of growth on it also?
This also comes a little bit into the book that I've just written. I won't go into it too much at the moment. We might pick that up later. But what typically happens with startups is that a founder or founders will see a problem, they see an opportunity, they feel a pain point. They might have been an expert in the field, they might have been using a particular set of tools for a while, but they feel like they're being underserved, or they feel like the market's been underserved. And so they come up with an idea, they have a vision for a new product. What happens is most of the people they speak to tell them it's a terrible idea. Their parents say, oh, you shouldn't do a startup, it's too risky, stay with a big company you're working with. Their friends are maybe like, oh, well, that's a good idea, but I don't know if people would use it. And so they start to get a really thick skin. Even VCs, they will talk to 50 VCs and 49 of them will say, this is a terrible idea, forget it. And 2 of them go, this is a brilliant idea, I want to be part of this journey. And so founders have these weird competing things. First of all, they learn very quickly not to listen to anybody apart from themselves. They listen to their gut. And so when a designer comes along and says, oh, I'm not so sure about this, or if you thought about talking to users, they're going to go, I'm not listening to you, I've got this. The other thing is that then what happens is they get lots of confirmation bias. So someone like me will come and say, you're a genius, here's $1 million. And someone else will say, you're an even bigger genius, here's $2 million. So now they've been given a whole bunch of money. They think they're a genius. They've been taught to not listen to anybody else apart from a few people. And they've been paid to deliver their vision. They've not been paid to deliver somebody else's vision. They've not been paid to have a designer tell them that this is all wrong. They're delivering their vision. And so whatever I think, whatever you think, it's really difficult to tell a founder that the thing they're building out of the gate is wrong or the way they're doing it is wrong. So kind of what you need to do to some extent is you need to let the founder get that first version out. It's that if you've ever written a book, it's that first messy draft. You've got that thing inside you that's building, that's growing, that's a power. And actually, you don't want anyone telling you no, 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 because your energy is a precious resource. Yeah. And so you block out anybody that doesn't align with your vision and you deliver the vision. Now, what typically happens is you deliver the vision and actually it's not very good. You have this kind of field of dreams mentality. If you build it, they will come. You'll launch a thing, you go, I've launched it. This is genius. I know it's genius. My investors know it's genius. Everyone else will see it's genius. And they sit back and they wait for the millions of people to rush in. And they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and nothing happens. And maybe they get 1 or 2 sign-ups. Maybe a couple of people make it all the way through. But those people then don't become regular users. And so they throw more features at the problem. Oh, well, maybe the reason is X, Y, Z. Maybe it doesn't have, an ABC, and you keep throwing more features at the problem. And it's only after you've done that for like 6 months and none of that work starts to have a big impact that you are ready to accept outside input. And so I've learned, even if I think that the founders I'm working with are going down the wrong route, there's very little point in me saying that and trying to convince them otherwise. Because they won't listen to me, and all that will happen is they'll go, Andy doesn't believe in me. But what I try and do is I try and flag up what I think the likely problems will be, but then be a little bit quiet. Because what happens is when they launch and those problems manifest, they go, oh, Andy said that would happen. Maybe I go and talk to Andy. And so it's almost like a kind of a Jedi mind trick, really. I'm not trying to convince them out of a kind of behavior. I'm supporting them and helping them get that first version live. But I'm also letting them know that once it's live, I think there's a whole bunch of things that we can do together. And this is, I think, where growth design comes in. In the early stages, most founders, they just want someone to deliver the thing. They want a feature-driven designer. They don't want to be told that we need to go back and talk to a dozen customers and we need to do 3-4 months worth of research. That feels like a waste of time. Even though it isn't, it feels like a waste of time.
Sure.
So, and the way I describe this is I don't have kids, but, you can tell your kids not to play with a hot plate as much as you want. Only when they burn themselves will they go, oh, maybe I should have listened to Andy. And so I think the same thing is true with designers. If you just try and tell your boss not to play with a hot plate, that ain't going to work. But you need to be there when they do burn themselves. You go, they're there. This is okay. Let me get the bandages out and let me show you how we can do this sensibly. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way, or that might come across that way, but it really is around kind of feeling where the energy is and making sure that you're going that direction. This is a real common thing. A lot of designers, talk about this in conferences, but in the world of stand-up and particularly the world of improvisation, there's this idea of yes and. If you're doing an improvisational comedy sketch and someone says here is my time traveling machine, and you go, that's not a time traveling machine, that's an egg cup. you ruin the whole comedic journey. You have to say, yes, that's a time traveling machine, and also it's a car or whatever. You have to say yes, and you have to build on it. And I think too often designers try and say, no, sorry, that's not a space, that's not a time machine at all. That's an egg cup. What are you talking about? And that takes all of the energy out of the relationship. That takes the trust out of the relationship. And now, as the founder, I'm dealing with this designer that is now a problem. They're a blocker. They're getting in my way. And so, as a designer, we need to be that superpower. We need to say to that person, yes, you are. This is absolutely a time machine, but also it's an X, Y, Z. And they trust you. They believe in you. You help them deliver their vision. And then once it's live, you help them improve it. You help them improve onboarding. You help them improve activation. You help them improve, utilization of particular features. And that's your window. Your window is not trying to talk them down off the ledge at the start, but by being there at the point where they feel the pain and helping them along.
Gosh, you've touched on so many things, but just thinking about this in the mindset of those early days are about acquiring the first 100, 10. Let's start from 10. First one, the first 10, the first 100 users. What are some of the most effective tactics in your experience that you've used, for example, in getting those customers? You talked about writing the book as a lever for then helping the agency to move along, for example, right? And getting the first users. But in other scenarios, what are other tactics that you've used?
Well, we've alluded to it, and actually this is one of the first chapters in the book, so I'll quickly introduce it to your listeners. So first of all, it's not really aimed at you. It's not aimed at a sort of growth designer community. Actually, the book is called The Growth Equation. Its subtitle is How Early Startups Can Build an Engine for Growth. And really, it's aimed at those first-time founders. It's aimed at the people that I've talked about that are going through that process, that are trying to get the first version of the product up, who are trying to figure out, how to find their first users, who are trying to figure out how to improve activation, all these kind of things. In reality, the book is a stealth design book. And one of the reasons I say self-design is because every single growth book I've seen up to this point has not mentioned design. There's a few PLG books, so there's a few, but most of the design books out there, if you read like growth hacking, if you read, growth levers, like when they say like the person that delivers growth, they don't say design. They say it's the product manager, it's the marketing manager, it's the head of sales. Very rarely do designers get a look in, and I just thought this was kind of really unfair. And so I wanted to write a book that was all about growth, that was aimed at startup founders, but that put designers in the center of that conversation. So if you read my book, it doesn't say, hey, look, go and hire an amazing product manager. I mean, it might do, but it also says, this is a design problem. This is how you solve it, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And so I'm wanting this to be a kind of a stealth book for founders. So one of the things I'm hoping for is I don't think the audience of growth designers will learn a ton. I mean, I think there's a bunch of obvious stuff in there. It is a growth design book by stealth. But what I'm really hoping is that people that are listening to this will maybe buy it for their boss, buy it for their head of product, buy it for their CTO, buy it for their CEO, and say, hey, look, here's a really good book that will kind of explain to you where growth comes from. And obviously then my job in that book is to go, you should talk to these people over here. You should talk to these designers because they know their stuff. But a lot of it comes from the work I do with startups as a VC and seeing the same problems happen over and over again. And one of those is finding your first users. As I said, a lot of people have this, if you build it, they will come mentality. Like if you are a designer or a sort of a technical leader or a business leader, you're mostly focusing in the early stages on getting the idea out, but you're not necessarily thinking of how you can connect that idea with a big enough audience in order to make sure that when you launch, people get what you're doing, they understand the value your product delivers, they understand how it's different from the 20, 30, 40 other products out there. Because this is the amazing thing. Like whenever I speak as a VC, whenever I speak to founders, and I say, well, there are 20 other products in this market. Like, why is yours different? They go, oh, no, you don't get it. This is different because... And then they list out 7 really, really small things. They go, oh, it's different because the pricing is slightly different. And we've got a really clever way of managing subscriptions, or, it has these 5 features that are really different. It's like, They're minor little things. And so a big part of that first journey, before you even get your early customers, is the ability to talk about your product in a meaningful way. I talk about the idea of you've got to get language market fit before you get product market fit. You have to be able to communicate the value, the unique nature of your product in a way that the audience gets. And designers are pretty good at that. Marketers are pretty good at that as well. You know, I think the first job often before you even design the design the product, is maybe design the website or design the deck. You know, whether it's a pitch deck or whether it's a website, that is your opportunity as a founder to really nail that positioning, to nail that language market fit. And once you're able to explain to people what this thing is, then it's easier to kind of get them to come and join you on the journey. But the reality is that when you launch your product, unless it is this kind of crazy world-changing chat GPT type thing, you're probably not going to have people just discover your product by accident. And so the reality is, like, actually the way that most of the most successful startups in the world get their early users is through their existing network. If you're building a tool for designers, you want to have a whole bunch of designers in your network. You probably want to have been a designer before. And so you reach out to all of your designer chums. You reach out to all of your heads of design friends in different companies. This is actually what Dylan did when he founded Figma. You know, he would go around to all of the tech companies in the Valley. He'd drive from office to office and demo the product. You know, your first 5, 10, 20, 30 customers are probably going to be from your network. You know, they're going to be from your friends, people who trust you, people who buy into what you're doing. So that's the first thing, is you have to have that network. If you don't have that network, you need to build it. One of the reasons that VCs will more likely invest in somebody that has a bit of a background in the sector, who has worked in a startup before, who has worked in the domain that your new business exists in, is because they know that the first 10, 100, 500 customers are probably going to be from your little black book or your co-founder's little black book. And so, making sure that you have that credibility in that network is huge. If you don't have that credibility in that network, then you've got a couple of options. One option is the marketing approach, which is I need to build that network. And you build that network of followers by creating content, by talking to people in a human way about the problem that you're trying to solve, tapping into something that is deep and meaningful into that audience. But if you don't have a network, building up 500 followers, 1,000 followers, 5,000 followers can take ages, 6 months, a year, 2 years. So having that network already is much better than kind of, trying to build a network from scratch. While you're building up that network, you might need to go to where these people hang out. Classically, Etsy, they spent their first, 6 months going to craft fairs. You go to the kind of places where your customers hang out, and you talk to them and you interview them and you ask them questions and you buy them coffee and you buy some of their stuff and you say, would you consider, have you ever thought about kind of trying to sell your stuff online? Hey, look, here's a free discount code. Like, you have to go to where these people hang out. I remember when I was, speaking at a conference in Amsterdam, and Uber had literally just launched in Amsterdam. And all of the team at Uber, like, they weren't sponsors of the event, but they attended, they bought tickets, and they just went around leaving stacks of free Uber vouchers, on tables and in toilets and in coffee shops and kind of going to where their people hung out. The same was true of Airbnb. The classic story, Airbnb was founded by people who realized that there was a big conference in the city they lived in, and there was all the hotels had kind of booked up. And so they used their network of designers, their network of people attending the conference to kind of get those first few beds sold. And so, it has to come from your network or going to where an existing network is. And if you don't have that, and you don't have the marketing time, then it's usually outbound, it's sales. And a lot of designers, a lot of engineers hate the idea of doing sales. A lot of designers and engineers think it's the devil, it's evil. And this is a problem. Like, one of the things I look for when I'm looking for founding teams isn't just people that can build the first version of the product. It's actually a lot of people can build the first version of a product. It's not that they've got a really good idea. The real thing about how this company is going to succeed is, can the founding team go out and sell? Can the founding team, do they have the network? Do they have the marketing skills? Do they have the sales skills? to get that first 10, 20, 50, 100 customers. And it is, it's about writing emails. Like Des Traynor, the founder of Intercom, was writing 100, 200 emails a day for the first, few weeks or months of the company running. Like just contacting everybody in his address book, doing outbound, saying, hey, look, we're building this thing. It solves this kind of problem. Would you be interested? And you get turned down, you get turned down, and you get turned down. So you write a better next email, and you write a better next email. And eventually you've done it so many times that you've got your perfect email sequence lined up. And then you send that to 10, 20, 30, 50 people. And 5 of them will respond. And then you walk them through. And then next week you do it again. And then 6 people will respond. And you get better and better and better. And so a big part of the first half of my book is how do you find your first customers? How do you do founder-led sales if you're somebody that's never done sales before and hates sales? How do you do founder-led marketing if you don't have an audience and you want to build an audience? And so, the book is full of practical tips on how to do that.
Quite interesting, honestly. I think I just have a bit of follow-up to that. Like you've mentioned lots of these tactics, from the marketing approach to sales-led, and you also said something interesting about the language market fit. So my question is, where does a growth designer fit in all this puzzle? Like, how do you play your role in this puzzle?
I mean, so first off, I would like to see more designers become founders.
Interesting.
That's the other way of getting design baked in from day one. You either become a VC or you become a founder. And if you're a founder and a designer, then the first thing you're really good at doing is good at doing customer discovery.
Yeah.
You're good at doing research. But not just from a user-centered perspective, not just figuring out what features and functions the product you're building needs to deliver, but understanding the user's mental model, understanding the user's perspective of the world, understanding the language they use, the framing they use. Oh, this product is a little bit like X. And then using that knowledge and insight to write good framing in order to kind of make it easier for people to sign up. I think a big part, of the early way of doing sales is by turning your discovery process into a sales process. You start by asking people, hey, look, what problem are you trying to solve? Oh, that's interesting. What features do you need? Oh, you need these features. And then you say, well, like, how much would it be worth if you could, have a product that solved those problems? Like, what kind of pricing model might you use? And they tell you, and you go, oh, well, look, actually our product does about 80% of the things that you're currently saying it needs to do. The other 20% we're working on, do you want to come and give it a try? We'll let you have a trial for a couple of weeks or a month or whatever. Like, it's so easy to turn a research conversation into a sales conversation. The problem I think a lot of designers have is they feel that there's some kind of like separation between church and state, that like we should never do that. And you're kind of right. If you're in a big company, like that's not your role. But if you're in a startup, you need to be a little bit flexible. And I think if you have a user-centered mindset, like this is the other thing, like I think a lot of people think sales is evil because their mentality is, I'm trying to convince somebody that doesn't want the thing to buy the thing. That's not good sales. Good sales, the best salespeople want to understand your problems and they want to make sure that they sell you something that solves your problems. That is user-centered. The best salespeople are user-centered designers. The best salespeople talk to customers, understand their needs, listen and go, oh, that's interesting. Actually, I think you could use this product or this feature that we have and that would solve that problem. Oh, that's interesting. Actually, we've been thinking about how we might solve this problem and we're going to release this new feature in a couple of weeks' time. So there's so much overlap between being a user-centered designer and a salesperson that sells a product that helps solve a need that I think there can be a really good overlap. But I think your real question is like, maybe not aimed at founders that are designers, but if you're the founding designer in a team, if you're hire number 3, 4, 5, you're probably not going to be hire number 1, but maybe they've hired an engineer, they've hired a couple of engineers or a salesperson, maybe you're the next in the door. Your job, as we talked about before, is to kind of there will be a list of features they're trying to push out. There'll be probably the founder will be having customer discovery calls and you're going to have to figure out, like maybe get yourself in there and be part of those conversations. In the early days, you're probably just delivering what you're told. But then you start seeing opportunities and you start going, oh, well, actually, we've only got 5% of the people who sign up actually activate. That's a real problem. Yeah. Why don't I try this technique? Why don't I write a simple onboarding email to help improve that? Why don't I record a little walkthrough of the onboarding process to help people? Why don't I redesign, and it only maybe takes half a day, why don't I redesign the landing page so that when people land on the landing page, it's not blank, but it has some useful information, or it has a sandbox example of like data. These are all things like, if you're a designer and you wait to be told what to do, don't be surprised if people just tell you what to do. But if you can look at an opportunity and go, oh, there's a thing here that is really important. If I have a crack at this, if you give me a couple of days' time, I can improve the onboarding process. The key thing I think is really important, and this is why I think growth designers are great, is a lot of regular feature-driven designers, they want to make the best thing possible. Like I use this metaphor of like chess versus poker. Most of the user-centered designers I know, they're like chess players. They want to study all the moves. Every time a piece gets moved, they want to think about it for 20, 30 minutes. And they know that if they are the best chess player in that game, they will always win. And so, they want it to be the best game. They want it to be the perfect game. They want to make no mistakes. But that just means that the game takes hours and hours and hours. The problem is early stage startups isn't like a game of chess. And if you approach it like a game of chess, somebody else will have outpaced you. Startup founders play it like a hand of poker. I'm not trying to win every hand. I'm trying to optimize, my chances of the hand being good. But I know that actually 9 out of the 10 hands will not be good. But I want to play, and I want to play really quickly. I want to bounce back from my mistakes. I want to minimize my losses, but I'm happy to lose a bit of money. But then when I start seeing things go my way, where the cards land in the way that I want, I'm going to double down. I'm going to bet big. I'm going to lean in. And so designers need to be comfortable pushing things out that aren't perfect. They need to play the game with a hand they've got, rather than shout and scream at the sky that they wish they got dealt a better hand. So if it means doing a really, really nasty onboarding landing screen that you knock together in a half an hour, if that's enough to make it 2% better, and then the boss goes, well, this is great, how can you improve this? How you can improve this? And so it's that classic thing about iterative design. Yeah. But what we'll do is we'll go, oh, no. We need to spend weeks and weeks and weeks designing the world's perfect, onboarding process. And that isn't going to help. So yeah, it's poker, not chess. It's quick, small improvements that demonstrate value, that push the activation rate from 3% to 4%, from 4% to 5%. And once people have got trust in you, then they are going to go, okay, well, look, Emmanuel has been right all of these times. And every time Emmanuel has done something, it's gone really well. If Emmanuel is now saying, I want to spend 2 weeks doing a bigger piece of work, we're going to trust him because he's built up that trust, because he's not been wrong before. So that's how you need to play it, I think.
Interesting. So let's go a little bit into your book. Like you mentioned about language market fit, which I think I read about it too some times ago when I was reading this book on data. From your perspective, I'd like to know, what's the importance of language market fit even before reaching product market fit? Like, can you break down to us?
Sure. Well, as I sort of alluded to earlier, a lot of founders have such a belief in the quality of their product that they just assume that everyone else will feel the same thing they feel. And they'll be like, oh, just use it and you'll see. So they can be quite blunt, they can be quite aggressive, they can be quite, not aggressive, but they can be quite frustrated that not everybody sees the genius of their product. But the difference is, they're the founder. They know all the ins and outs of the product. They have been using it for the last 3 or 4 months. They've been thinking about it for maybe the last 3 or 4 years. So of course they have understood. But if this is the first time you're experiencing the product, maybe you followed a link on social media, maybe you got sent an email, maybe you've gone to the website. You need to really quickly figure out, is this something for me? Is this going to be useful? Is it going to solve the problems that I have? Is this going to be worth me investing 20 minutes to sign up and then 2 hours to start using the product? And for me, I've got a dozen other products I could look at. I've got a bunch of other things that are maybe more mature, that are more sophisticated, that my friends are using and recommending me. And so they're not even going to give your product a try. The idea of product market fit is that people have understood the need and are using the product in a way that kind of delivers value. You are never going to get to the point of delivering value if you can't get people through the front door. And people aren't going to get through the front door because you know the value is there if you don't communicate that. And so it's all about positioning. It's all about communicating the value. It's all about understanding the needs of people, getting into their head, getting into their psychology, understanding how you can position them as the hero in their own hero's journey, that your product is a tool that's going to make them, give them superpowers, it's going to make them better, faster, that's going to take the pain away, and in a way that they kind of immediately get. And I just think most early stage startups' websites are terrible. They're confusing. I don't understand what this thing is. Like all the time, like someone will send me a website and go like, oh, this is our product. I'm like, I don't understand what it is.
Exactly.
And then people think, well, you're stupid. Like, you're a VC, you're a stupid VC. You should get it because it's clear to me. And it's like, it's not clear. Like you're saying that you're an end-to-end SaaS sales solution in a leverage market data world. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what any of that means. You might know what it means, but I don't. And if I don't, I'm sure a lot of your customers don't. And so, again, it's fundamental, behavioral science. It's going like, let's talk to the customers. Let's understand how they talk about the problem. Let's understand how they talk about the competitors. Let's understand how they talk about this solution. And then let's explain what we do in their language, not my language. Let's not use marketing language. Let's not copy the language of the other big players out there that are leveraging this and they're synergizing that. Let's be really, really clear. A lot of this comes down to jobs to be done. A lot of this comes down to just like, what is the pain that these users are facing? What is the blocker? And how can we explain it in that way? Some of it comes down to like the buckets in their head, like, do they understand? Well, they probably understand what a CRM is, but, there are dozens and dozens of CRMs out there in the market. So why does your CRM make any difference? But maybe you've got something special about it. Maybe it's not a CRM. Maybe it's something else, some other framing that you can use that makes it clear. Maybe it's a market-specific CRM. Maybe it's the best CRM for agency founders, or maybe it's a combination of a CRM and a video calling platform and an AI sentiment analysis platform. Whatever it is, you've got to figure out the right hook. And that might mean trying a dozen different framings. It might mean having to experiment with 3 or 4 or 5 different positioning statements to make sure you get that product language fit. And once you get that market language fit, and once you get that market language fit, then you get that product market fit.
Yeah. I love phrasing around, you might need to experiment with so many frameworks for you to figure out the right language market fit. When you think about how there are companies that have had to pivot so many times, and I think I read this about Y Combinator, companies that have come out of Y Combinator, for example, that have pivoted so many times, and it's often sometimes not even what they apply to YC with, that is what they're thriving on today. And it makes me think about how it becomes very crucial for you to think through who your ideal customer base is that will get your product, right? So when you think about that with startups, how do you begin to, this question is in twofold, how do you begin to identify that ICP in the very early stages, but then flip it around to the designers as well? When you understand that you get the ICP, that helps you with that language, with the messaging, with crafting the experience. How can designers then effectively collaborate with founders to ensure that they're attracting the right users from a design perspective?
I mean, again, I go into this in quite a lot of detail in the book. I think one of the first challenges is possibly around the language of ICP, ideal customer profile. If you are targeting an ideal customer, what does ideal mean to the founder? Well, it probably means a big customer, probably means a well-established customer, probably means a customer that's willing to pay lots of money. The problem is these ideal customers might be the ideal customer for where your product is heading in 3 or 4 years' time, but you might not have all the features, all the bells and whistles, all the security compliances, all of the multi-level user management that is needed for a big ideal customer. And so a lot of the time what happens is people target these ideal customers, and those ideal customers are not early adopters. They're bigger risk averse customers. And so they look at it and they go, well, this is interesting, but we're not quite ready for it. Or it's not quite ready for us. Come back to us in a couple of years' time. And so they keep getting locked down. They keep getting knocked down. And it's because their ideal customer is not who their beachhead customer should be. Their beachhead customer is something different. Their beachhead customer is the people that will give you a try initially. They are the people who don't need all the bells and whistles. But the one thing that your product does better than anybody else is the one thing they care about. They don't care about SOC 2 compliance. They don't care about the fact that your platform doesn't have multi-level permissions. They care about that one thing that they've been really annoyed that their current suppliers don't offer. They're the people that have emailed their current providers and said, oh, I really wish you could do X. And they're like, not on the roadmap. And they've looked around for people that do that thing and no one's doing it. And suddenly you appear and you that one thing that they fall in love with. And they will move heaven and earth to become a user of your tool because you're meeting their initial needs. Now, the sad thing is, those beachhead customers, they might grow into being your ideal customer profile. They might be an early stage founder that only has a small team. And as they grow, you grow. And as you grow, they grow. And they might grow into being in the ICP. But in the early stages, they're not. And it might be that actually, sadly, they might be the people that get you off the ground, but you might need to actually pivot into a different market later on. You know, plenty of companies like HubSpot, HubSpot started by being a really cheap, CRM for small businesses, people with just one or two or three, employees and maybe 10, 20 customers. And that was enough to get them to get their first fundraise and their second fundraise and to grow and grow and grow. But they realized quickly that that was not how they were going to make their money. They would actually make their money on much bigger customers. And so, quite soon into the process, maybe after a year or two, they actually sort of stopped all the low level of accounts and started sort of pushing more towards enterprise. And that's a shame, and actually a lot of the people who they relied on to launch, they then let go. Obviously, they let go and a whole bunch of other people, swamped in to kind of hoover them up. So, it wasn't necessarily bad for the customers. But I guess the point is like your landing point, your beachhead customers are not necessarily the same as your ICP. And actually, I think a lot of the time, this is the other problem with designers. Designers are designing this perfect product for this ICP. They identify the ICP. They don't realize that actually the people who are going to be using the thing first off are scrappy. They don't care necessarily about the design. They don't care that it works. They don't care that you have this beautiful login or this beautiful system. And so we need to be a little bit more flexible. We need to try and build tools for this underserved market first, and then we can grow from there.
Great. I think I love the way you really blended the founder's perspective to the designer's perspective. That's really, really amazing. So we all agree that most of the time, founders or this little genius that starts company, most of them might not have psychology background or kind of having this knowledge of behavioral science. Looking at from that angle, what is that one principle that founders or designers, one key principle that from the behavioral science that any startup could really apply, irrespective of their budget, team size, and that can really influence their user behavior to drive growth?
I mean, it's a good question. It's one I'm probably going to push back on because I think we live in this kind of like really kind of trend-driven, tactic-driven world where founders are looking for that silver bullet. What's the one thing that's going to make this problem go away? What's the current trend? Oh, the current trend is agile. Oh, the current trend is growth design. Oh, the current trend is AI. Like everyone is looking for this secret thing. But there really aren't any secret things. There are short-term advantages that you can use that really, really quickly get overused and then are no longer an advantage. There was a time back in the day when internet storage was really expensive. And so, of course, Gmail and Dropbox, will give you 500, megabytes of storage, will give you a gigabyte of storage, will give you 10 gigabytes of storage. Now storage is water. So that advantage has disappeared. It
Yeah.
used to be that the growth hackers would secretly sign you up to things you didn't know you signed up to. And for a while it worked. And then companies like LinkedIn got sued and then they stopped doing that. So there were all of these short-term advantages. Like any short-term advantage I give you now, by the time the book goes out, or maybe by the time the podcast goes out, that advantage will disappear. And so I'm not interested in short-term advantages, and I don't believe in silver bullets. What I do believe is understanding human behavior and utilizing deep understanding of human behavior in order to make positive experiences. I think this is what designers are good at. I think one of the reasons I really love the growth of growth design is because previously growth used to be the preserve of marketing teams. And marketing teams would often, not always, have the kind of like this black hat, white hat, grey hat attitude, whereby they would do things that are a little bit kind of sketchy. They'd do things that are a little bit kind of push the edge. They would do things that subsequently got legislated against. And they would be effective, but they would also start a scorched earth policy where, they would get an advantage and then it would ruin it for everybody else. One of the things I love about designers is because designers are user-centered, they also tend to be more ethical.
Yeah.
They tend to have this attitude, it's like, well, we want to get users to use our system, but not because we've tricked them, because they're going to get value. We want to help them get to that value quicker, not pretend that the value is there when it isn't, but to actually do this in an ethical, moral way. And so I really like the fact that designers are taking a much more detailed look at growth, because I think they have a moral and ethical standpoint, which is really, really useful and important, and can make sure that we don't scorch earth anymore. I'm not saying that of marketers, but I am saying this of growth hackers. I think there's a big grey hat growth hacking attitude that was good 10, 20 years ago. It was popular, but has really gone out of favour. So when I'm encouraging designers to think about using behavioural science, it's not to trick people, it's to try and help them. It's to try and understand what the blockers are that get in people's way, the blockers to adoption. If someone signed up to your product because they want the value your product delivers, your job is to try and get that baked into their behavior as quickly as possible. And that's not, like I say, to trick them. That's because they have actively wanted to get that value. And so your job is to use your understanding of behavior, your understanding of language, to try and help those users get over that hump and get the value you're delivering consistently and ethically. And so I think having an understanding of cognitive bias, having an understanding of nudge theory, having an understanding of gamification, but not in a skeezy, underhand way, but in a helpful, positive, life-affirming way, is really, really important. And so I think designers can really utilize their knowledge of human behavior. It's kind of less common these days, but a lot of the people that I grew up with who were UX designers came from a cognitive science background. They were psychologists. They worked in, HCI, CHI. They came from that background where they were trying to understand human behavior. A lot of it is because the early days of computer science was driven by people who were designing originally cockpits of airplanes or control systems of the nuclear power plants. And you want to understand how someone behaves if there's an emergency. You don't want to be putting, the big red button, that says, emergency next to the big red button that says, like, order me coffee. You don't get those two things mixed up. So you have to understand things, like affordances and, understanding that, you need to change the tone of warnings so people don't kind of get blind to the warning sounds going off in your cockpit. And I think the same activities, it's there to help people. And so using your behavioral science knowledge to help people get signed up, get situated, get that value. And so, one of the favorite parts of the book I wrote, because I'm a big nerd when it comes to behavioral science, is a whole chapter on behavioral science. I talk about some of my favorite cognitive biases, but I also talk about some of the bad days of growth hacking. One of my good friends, Harry Brignall, is one of the leading lights in this sort of anti sort of dark patterns kind of movement, like people building like negative behavioral kind of hacks into products. And so I talk a lot about how you can use behavior design ethically. And I recommend anybody that's working in this kind of space gets Harry Brignole's book about persuasive patterns or bad dark patterns to avoid that being something you do.
You've hit a lot of points, honestly, Andy. And I absolutely love that you say that there are so many things that we need to consider when it comes to that ethical considerations, especially because it's so easy to toe that fine line between nudging and manipulating. It's a very, very fine line, which I appreciate because I'm a trained lawyer before I became a product designer. So part of your experience when you're studying law is you do have to take quite a lot of classes in psychology, because when you're trying to save someone's life and your argument is literally in the way, you need to be able to understand that context. And I enjoy bringing that to my work. Anyway, we're going to move on now. I do want to say to you, though, the way you've talked about your book, I beg to disagree. I feel like designers definitely need to read it, because even though it might be things that they are familiar with, it's oftentimes, sometimes it takes you reading something being said in a particular way for it to become refreshed in your mind or for it to really hit home, right? And this is when founders flip the script and think that hiring a particular designer will change the course of everything. And it could very well be the case. I don't disagree. But I think when you begin to think about this in the context of assembling a dedicated growth team, it's important to also begin to recognize the signs that lead you to come into that decision of making those kind of hires. So, can you speak on what those signs are? What are the things founders need to look out for first on their side to begin to think, okay, we want to build out a growth team, we're thinking about designers. How do we begin to recognize it's time for us to make this decision?
It's an interesting question. One of the reasons I don't think there is such a thing as a silver bullet solution is because pretty much every company is different. I talk about how, particularly in the early days, let's talk about design for a second, but marketing. It's really common for founders to hire a marketer, and that marketer happens to be amazing on one platform, right? Their superpower is figuring out stuff around Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn. But it turns out that their audience actually isn't a consumer of TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn. Or, actually what they need to do is to do an email outreach, or they need to do traditional advertising or whatever. And so I think quite often you can find somebody that has a playbook that worked in their last company, that has got stellar results, that's done an amazing job. But when they bring that playbook to your company, it doesn't fit, because it's not the playbook that's wrong. It's just that they're playing a different game, or they're playing it with a different team, or it's on a different field, or it's different spectators. So you can't expect, I think, in the early stage to buy an existing playbook and it will work first time round. So I think when it comes to hiring a marketer particularly, you don't want to hire somebody that is an amazing social media marketer, or an amazing content strategist, or whatever it is. You want to hire somebody that can explore a bunch of different acquisition channels and can build the playbook from first principles based on what works for your company. I think the same is around design. Just because you kicked ass at, in Figma, you were the first design hire at Slack, you were this amazing growth designer at HubSpot, doesn't mean that you were going to walk straight in and hit the ground running and do an amazing job. What I tend to find is actually there is a learning process. It happens with everybody. They do an amazing job in their previous company. They come to the new company and try and do exactly the same thing, and it works and it fails. And they suddenly have this crisis of confidence, like, oh, I don't think I know now what's going on. And it's only that third job where they realize, like, my superpower wasn't playing this playbook that I previously learned. It was writing a new playbook and adapting. And so there's adaptability. And so I think there is a way of hiring sort of not silver bullet designers, but hiring designers or marketers or salespeople who can come in, who have been in enough companies that they know that they don't have a single playbook, they have a toolkit, and they have a broad enough toolkit that then they can apply those tools to your problem in an order which they think is going to be, the best order to work for. But when that first tool doesn't work, they reach for the second one. And when that second tool doesn't work, they reach for the third one and the fourth one and the fifth one. And ideally, you have enough tools in your toolkit that you find the tool that works and it solves that problem. And then you do the next one, and then you do the next one, and then you do the next one. And then you build up a unique playbook for the team, the company, the product, the customers that works in this situation that would never have worked in any other. Like, I know founders that have had, massive luck with Google Ads. And I know other founders that have found Google Ads to be no value at all. I have met founders who have really believed that onboarding is the key to their success. And I have other founders that would say that the onboarding, all the experiments they've done have made no difference, and actually something else in their design has been the thing that's kind of changed the world for them. You meet people that do PLG, growth hacks. It's actually community. For one company, we really heavily leaned into community, and community was the thing that really exploded for us. And another company, there is no community. Community hasn't been an acquisition loop that's worked for them, but something else has. Maybe they've explored something really old-fashioned, referrals. And maybe for one company, referrals has been really the thing that's driven 40, 50, 60% of their growth. And so the key is not having one particular silver bullet, but knowing all the bullets, knowing all the toolkits, and being willing to experiment. And so again, that's what the book does, hopefully, is I think it outlines all of the approaches, the playbooks, the hacks that you can try, or the not hacks, but the techniques you can try. But it doesn't tell you if you only do this one thing, then you will be successful. Because for every one person that has success, 20 other people will have failure. And so I'm trying to get people to think a little bit more from first principles than doing what my other founder friend says, because what worked for them won't work for you.
Sure.
Love that. And when you think about it from a perspective of culture, right? In making those initial hires, because we've mentioned and talked about it, you want someone whose mindset is that as I'm working on X, if there is an opportunity for Y and Z, then we will take it, right? We want to consistently experiment. We want to look at the data, look at the information we have. How can founders begin to establish that culture amongst the first hires that they will work with?
I mean, I think it's very rare that somebody's first hire would be a growth designer. I think typically what ends up happening is you hire 2, 3, 4 good product designers. You might hire a really amazing founding designer who's quite senior, and they start by doing a bit of everything, and then they get a little bit more UXy, and then they hire a second and a third and a fourth designer that kind of fills in their gaps. So finding that first really broad, talented designer that is happy to deliver features that you've specified without talking to customers, but is also happy to push back on some of the founders' worst ideas and is willing to come and give better ideas. Somebody who is willing to do a little bit of research, but not too much. Someone's willing to come up with some hypotheses, but not be... So you need somebody that's kind of sort of flexible. It's usually tend to be somebody kind of mid-career. If they're too early, they will do what they're told. And if they're too late and too senior, they will try and control everything and play it by their play. So finding somebody that's kind of mid-career and flexible and has maybe... This is their second or third startup. Maybe they were hire number 3 or 4 or 5 at another startup that grew really big. Maybe they worked in a bigger startup, so they've seen what success looks like, and now they're wanting to have a bit of a taste of their own. So you kind of want someone that's a little bit flexible. I don't think you probably want to start hiring a growth designer until maybe design hire 3, 4, or 5. Because kind of what you want is most founders have a big backlog of features. They're just shipping. And what I advise people is you start by building, 2 or 3 delivery teams. And these delivery teams are just the feature delivery teams. They are improving the UX, but they're mostly shipping features. But what tends to happen is actually, I find, before you even start looking externally to hire a growth designer, what happens is one of the people in your team, hopefully, will start to share that experience. There'll be people that have a little bit more interest in psychology. There may be people that have a little bit more interest in metrics. That's the one designer on the team that is asking you for your KPIs and your North Star metrics. They're the one designer that's actually helping you figure that out. They're the one designer that talks about the Google Heart, metric process and tries to help you figure this stuff out. They're the one that kind of says, oh, well, actually, I've got an idea about how we can do something really simple here. It's not a feature. It's not been delivered by the product manager, but might help solve that problem. And so, I think before you start looking externally, you try and find that person that's a little bit hacky. I tend to find that those early growth designers maybe often have a little bit of background in another field. Like maybe they were a designer, but they have a little bit of front end. They have the ability to go and open a coding platform and, drop in some JavaScript and drop in some CSS and do the stuff that actually the other designers can't do, and the engineering team don't have time to do. And so I think finding that person on the team that has that energy and enthusiasm is a first step. If you don't have that person, then yeah, sure, you need to go out and look externally. But that's maybe your sort of fifth, sixth hire or fourth, fifth hire. And I think you need that person to be part of a small independent team. So you have a growth designer, you have maybe a really good, front end person that helps them out if they're not front end, focused. Maybe you bring in one of your marketing people. Maybe you've got a marketing person that is a bit more analytically driven, is a bit more experimental. And you start with this little small team, 2 or 3 people. And because all of the features are being flowed to the feature team, you don't need to bother the founder. You're not going to the founder saying, what do I build next? You're finding out what's broken and you're fixing it and you're improving it and you're improving it. And you're feeding back and you're telling the founder, oh, this week we improved, utilization of this feature by 2%. Next week you say, oh, well, we saw that there was a problem with adoption of this other feature and we've run this experiment. But they need to have the sort of the protection of the other feature team that is just ship, that they can have a bit of air cover, that they have the freedom and the flexibility to do that. And so you're looking for somebody that's a little bit more hacky, that's a little bit more, short term. A lot of the UX people don't want to think in, 1-2 day sprints. They don't want to think in hypotheses. They want to go out and do the big research and build the amazing prototype and user journey and spend 3 months building the thing and shipping it. So you kind of need to have that kind of balance there. But I think, really quickly on, maybe Series A and beyond, like having a growth designer or a growth PM or a growth marketer, like having some kind of growth function there and building this little tiger team. And then what ends up happening is you build a bigger team and a bigger team. I mean, this is the whole last chapter of my book, is all about kind of like building out that team. Start small, grow, build that team. And then eventually you'll probably have a huge separate growth team that is bringing in marketing and product and all these kind of things. And then eventually you'll probably split it out again and you'll have growth functions, across a whole group of different product teams. But it starts small, you build it out, you grow. One of the reasons, again, I talk in the book a lot, but one of the reasons I think a lot of this emerges is that if you only have feature delivery teams in your product team, marketing starts to ask a lot of challenging questions. In the early stages, marketing is just kind of sending traffic your way. But then marketing will say, hey, look, well, we just need to update the website. Can we own that? And then there becomes a conversation of like where the website starts and finishes. And they'll be like, well, we've got some ideas around like once people are on the website and they're in the app, like we want to have some messaging that helps them discover new features. And so what happens is marketing gets deeper and deeper into the product. It starts taking more and more of the product away. And you then, as a product team, start to become an agency for the marketing team. And eventually, the product leader throws their toys out the pram and says, enough is enough. Like, we're product. All of the marketing stops at this point and no more. And anything that happens after this gateway is now the product team. And that's great. But then that team has to have some kind of capability. And so you have to hire your growth designer. You have to hire your growth marketer. And so what you tend to find is that like you start to incubate internally this little growth function because of the boundaries between where the product starts and stops. And a lot of this is also around kind of cadence. The reason that I see a lot of animosity between marketing and product is that the product team has this beautifully crafted roadmap, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months into the future, and it's all well structured and everyone knows where everything is. And suddenly marketing says, oh, we need you to do this X, so we need to do it urgently. We need to do Y, we need to do it urgently. We need to do Z, and we need to do it urgently. And They don't have the capacity to deliver that because it's a product function. And so you get this weird situation where suddenly the product team are overwhelmed. And so I think the best way of doing that is for product to own product growth.
Interesting. I like how you outline some of these attributes that those kind of I would be more biased. Me, I'll talk towards the designers, being scrappy, being what's the other word used? But I think the scrap kind of sticks to me, being a scrappy designer where you're able to just toss around a lot of things in your toolbox. So looking at designers who are listening, eager to make this sort of contribution in terms of growth trajectory, what advice will you give to such designers in terms of skill set they need to build on and how they need to position themselves as a valuable asset to such team or such company?
But I think in general, with my talks, when I talk at UX conferences like this conference I'm talking in the Nordic region, a lot of it is about helping designers understand their business partners. Like as designers, we're really good at understanding our users. We need to try and apply that empathy to our business partners. We need to talk to them. We need to understand their perspective. We need to understand what they're trying to deliver. We need to understand the KPIs they're trying to affect and why that's important. It might be important because they're trying to raise their next round of funding and there's certain targets they need to hit in order to do that, in order to unlock that funding, to do all of the amazing things that you want to do as a design team. And so we need to apply our empathy to our business partners as much as our customers. And we need to balance those two things. We need to understand the language of business. A lot of designers focus all of their attention on reading books by designers, reading, like going to design conferences, going to, learn how to do Figma better, to learn how to do research better, to learn the intricacies of UX. All of this is really important. But we also need to read business books. We need to read books on business strategy. We need to read books on pricing. We need to read books on behavioral design as it applies to, behavioral economics particularly. And so I think that the early growth designers are often the ones that read behavioral economics books. They're often the ones that kind of find that intersection of business and human behavior fascinating. And so if you want to get into growth design particularly, I think that is the seam of interest that you need to follow. And you need to kind of figure out how you can apply your design skills to business problems rather than user problems. And ultimately, you will have a two-tier team. You will have a group of designers that are solving user problems, and you have a group of designers that are solving business problems, and there will be overlap in the middle, but there will be different people working at different cadences and different functions. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, that's where I think as a designer, you need to lean into a little bit more if you want to be seen as a value add, problem solver for business.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that because right now my key partners are business directors. So much of that is ensuring that we're constantly feeding into that. What does your roadmap look like? What are your priorities over the next quarter or two? What does the journey ahead look like? How can design be a support for that? A quick follow up though, when you flip it around, you've also got the scenarios, especially in bigger companies, right? Where design can be that support, but design is seen as that function that delivers the support and nothing more. And if that is the case for anyone who's listening, for example, how do you turn those kind of scenarios around? We've touched on quite a bunch of things, but like in practical terms, if they had to take away one thing from today that they can implement from tomorrow, what would it be?
I mean, again, this is a sort of a tricky silver bullet question that I'm not going to answer. But what I will say is what you've asked is ultimately what I do as a coach. As a coach, when I coach, heads, directors, and VPs of product and design, those are the kind of conversations that we have. And what I don't do, if you're a good coach, what you don't do is you don't give people answers, because if I say, oh, go and do X, and they go and do X and it blows up in their face and they get fired, they'll blame me. But what I can do is I can help them think through the problems and think what is the right solution for them. So literally just today, I was talking to one of my coaching clients, and they are trying to figure out how they can raise the profile of design in their organization. And one of the things that through conversation they decided to do is we're going to do a twice monthly newsletter from the design team. And every 2 weeks, we're going to send this newsletter out, and it's going to be really quick. And it's going to be like, One thing that the design team did this month that was really cool that you might not have known about. It will be one thing we learnt about our users that you might not have known about. And it's like, here's a cool thing that we were reading this month or this 2 week. And the idea is that they will send that not only to their internal designers, but to their product partners and their business partners and their engineering partners. And some people might read it and some people won't. But over the course of 3, 4, 5, 6 months, they get an opportunity to tell their story. They get an opportunity to market design. They get an opportunity to make their partners think about, oh, I wonder what else the design team could do. You know, a lot of the work that happens in designers happens in their heads, it happens in Figma, it happens hidden. So is it any wonder that the executives don't know what we're doing because we don't tell anyone about it? As a design leader, part of your job is a marketing, you're the head of marketing for your design team. Now, there are a dozen other ways this head of design could have chosen to market. They could have done the big pitch. They could have, worked on relationship building. They could have found a problem that an influential stakeholder really cared about, and they could have solved it for them. There's not one size fits all approach. But what I would say, and this is very self-serving, but if your audience have some of these kind of issues, come and talk to me as a coach, and I'd love to work with you, and we can work together and work through some of these challenges, and you can find out what the right solution is for you. And it might be something, it might be a newsletter, but it might be an internal conference, it might be an away day, it might be any number of other things that you do. It might be a public feedback session, who knows? But I can work with you to figure out what that solution is, and then you can tailor it to your needs. So yeah, but ultimately it's about marketing, it's about sales, it's about influence. A lot of the challenges that designers have particularly is growing their executive presence. We talk about kind of getting a seat at the table. I know so many designers that have that seat at the table, but they hide away. They don't talk like the other executives in the room. And the head of product and the CTO and the head of marketing come and they have this presence and everyone sits and listens. And the designer just sits there and listens and goes away. And so some of it is around our soft skills. Some of it is around the way we present, the way that we talk, the willingness to share our ideas, the willingness to bring people along the journey. And so the problem is that there is no one size fits all. There's no one silver bullet. It's about growing into the role as an influential leader, and that is why coaching is the solution rather than a list of kind of features.
I love that. I might be reaching out to you, Andy. All right, so question about the future of design and what excites you, right? We are seeing so many changes, emerging trends, technologies, so many things. Are there specific things that you're particularly really excited about?
I mean, excited is a loaded term because it means positivity. What I'm really interested in what will happen in the future of design, but at the moment, I don't think it's positive or negative. I think it is yet to be decided. And I think all of us designers and our product management peers and our engineering peers and our executives are writing that story, and it could go in a bunch of different ways. I think that we might have reached peak design. And by that, I mean, that doesn't mean that design is now doomed. I don't think that's true at all. But I think maybe a year or two ago, we've been saying that there haven't been enough designers in the market for a really long time. And so we've trained new designers and we've done boot camps and the more and more designers come out. And up to 2 or 3 years ago, design teams are growing and growing and growing. And then we hit a peak. And then there was a whole bunch of redundancies. And a lot of really talented people have been struggling to find roles recently. And I think that's a real shame. So I think we might have hit peak design, at least temporarily, maybe a local maxima, hopefully. But I think the nature of the problems that we solve has changed. We're no longer solving things from first principles. We're applying existing patterns. We're applying existing design systems. And the thing that is limiting our business partners now, it used to be that research was this special thing that only designers knew. And now we've got dedicated research teams and we've got product managers doing product discovery. It used to be that wireframing was this magical thing that only designers could do. And now product managers are knocking out wireframes left, right, and center, or prototypes. It used to be that laying out pages was this thing that only designers could do. But now, if you've got a fairly robust design system, engineers can do a really, really great pass based on a specification using your existing design system. I don't think it will be long before tools like Figma, no longer specialist tools, but a bit more like Canva. You are a product manager and someone says to a product manager, hey, we want you to imagine this whole new user journey. And rather than going to your designer buddy and saying, hey, look, designer buddy, can you do your magic in Figma? You will go and you will pull from an existing design system and an existing set of patterns, and you will be able to assemble a really, really convincing looking user journey that is almost ready to launch because it's built from your design system. And you've not had to understand all of the ins and outs of Figma, which is still a pro design tool. And so I think we are coming to a point where it's an interesting kind of point, actually. It's a nexus. We're coming to a point where product managers can write descriptive code, like AI type kind of prompts, and it has the power to output actual code. We're coming to a point where product managers can write page description diagrams or product requirement documents, and maybe not now, but in a year or two, that can be converted into relatively realistic looking code or design. At the same time, I think designers have the ability as well. Designers can not only design work, but they can plug it into their back-end system, maybe not now, but in a year or two's time, and they can launch an update without having to ask their engineering friend. Designers can also, to your point earlier, go and start having conversations with the business around user needs and requirements. Like, I'm a designer, but this morning I was using ChatGPT to help hone a series of outreach emails. That's something I probably wouldn't have done a year or two ago, but because I've got this sidekick that can help me now. So I think designers will be more like product managers. I think product managers will be more like designers. I think engineers will be more like product managers. I think engineers will be more like designers. We're all merging together. And so I think it's down to the tools that emerge and the attitudes we have. I've said that a lot of designers are being made redundant, but a hell of a lot of product managers are being made redundant as well. If you have a designer that's great with business and you have a product manager that's great with business, maybe only one of those roles needs to exist. And then it's not necessarily about the role. Do product managers win or designers win? Maybe it's about the person. Maybe of the two people, one of those people is better. One of those people has made more impact to the business. They've made more friends. They've made more network. So I think we're moving to this world where we were going to be doing more with less, and we are going to be augmenting our natural abilities with all these kind of interesting tools that come along. And I don't know where that leads us. I think it leads us to less designers and less engineers and less product managers. But I think it leads us in a really exciting place. And I think as designers, we have to adapt these new tools. We can't be the 20, 30 year career designer that doesn't adapt to the new platforms. We need to be those designers that are going to be going and doing all these new things. And so, yeah, I think the future is really, really interesting, exciting, scary in equal measure. But I do think that the way that design is done in 10 years time or 20 years time will look very different from the way it's done today.
I love that. Wow. Thank you so much, Andy. This has been a fantastic conversation. And one last thing on where our listeners can find you, learn more about your book and your work.
Yep. Well, the best place probably is just go to my website, andybud.com. And I've got some blog posts up there. I have, a page, about the book and my coaching. I feel a little guilty saying this, but I'm still on X. I hate myself for being on X, but you can still find me on X at Andy Bud on X. You can find me at Andy Bud on Blue Sky. You can find me at Andy Bud on Threads. I'm probably a little bit more active on Threads. You can find me at Andy Bud on LinkedIn. So all of your usual places, but maybe start with X or Threads, or probably better my website, and then go from there.
I love that. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Manuel for our lightning round questions.
Good. It's been a very, very interesting conversation, Ms. Sincere. And going to a very fun section I like to make it very snappy. Just going to go straight to the point. One word answers, no cheating. All right, let's eat it. 3 top products you use daily and you love.
I mean, that's a really tough question. I know you said quick. I mean, my life is email, so I know that's really boring. I don't love email, but I use email all the time, or I use video conferencing. But neither of the things that I love, but I can't live without them. I think ChatGPT is really, really brilliant, but it's not something I use daily, but it's definitely something I use weekly.
Okay. One design resources you keep going back to every day.
I'm no longer a designer really anymore. So there isn't a kind of a particular kind of resource I go back to apart from my community, my network. Through social media, Threads, LinkedIn, that is my resource. My resource is the internet and my network.
Great. 3 books you like to recommend and would be open to you being biased about your book.
I'm going to recommend books that aren't necessarily design related. I really like a book called Turn the Ship Around, which is all about leadership based on a nuclear submarine captain. I really like the book Don't Split the Difference, which is all about negotiation from an ex-CIA negotiator. And I think a classic book when it comes to strategy is Blue Ocean Strategy. So that's a good primer for designers that are wanting to understand strategy more.
Sorry, what do you call the last one?
Blue Ocean, yeah, IBS. What profession would you have been instead of your current one?
I did spend a bit of time working as a dive instructor. There's something really nice about kind of like living on a beach and taking people to dive. So that was always my backup plan. If no one wants to hire me anymore, I can be a dive instructor. I also learned to fly recently, so I'm a private pilot. And so if I wasn't, maybe if the 22, 23-year-old Andy had got into pilot school, I would have been an airline pilot. Not because I think being a pilot is a really great job, but I love to travel. And so I'd get to travel around the world and do a fun thing. So those are my answers.
Okay. Your favorite food?
I know this is meant to be quick fire, but like I don't have a favorite food. Like I think this is going to sound really really rude, but 5-year-olds have a favorite food. Like I like pizza. I am a multi-level person. Like I love amazing pizza. I love fine dining. I like Thai food. I love Japanese food. There's no one food that I would say that I love above all. I am partial to a masala dosa though. I love Indian food, and I think if I had to only eat one thing all the time, I'd probably eat masala dosa. But I'd probably get very ill of only eating pizza and fried batter. Sorry, potato and fried batter. But yeah, masala dosa is a top snacking Indian food.
I think I bet you try African foods too.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I've only spent a little bit of time in South Africa, which probably doesn't quite count. But I love a lot of the regional food in South Africa. I've also spent a lot of time in North Africa, like Morocco particularly. But there's a whole region of Africa I want to explore, and I think the food. Yeah, I can't wait to go and explore amazing African food. So yeah, I'll take you up on that offer.
What's your favorite movie?
Again, I'm not 5, so I don't have a favourite movie. The movies that I've seen multiple times, I've seen Star Wars a lot. Obviously, I've seen Back to the Future a lot. I think Back to the Future is a perfect movie. I think the pacing, the storyline, it's multi-layered. But there's dozens and dozen movies that I see. So yeah, no favourite movie, but those are 2 ones that I like.
Great. Over to you, Ini.
Thank you so much, Andy, for being here. We have loved chatting with you, and I cannot wait for your book to come out. I definitely, for one, will be purchasing a copy.
Yeah, definitely.
And I hope that for our listeners as well, this is a conversation that you find useful, whether you're a designer, founder, product manager, whatever cater you find yourself in. And I also hope for designers who are listening that you're able to take away potentially ways of thinking, or perhaps of challenging the way you think and approach your work. And if you're a growth designer, I hope that this conversation has also provided more context of areas in which you can potentially improve on your work, but also build for the future. So thank you, Andy.
Brilliant, thank you. And just one very last thing, if you want to get announced of when the book launches, if you just go to andybudd.com/book, and hopefully in the next month or so, I'll be uploading a couple of free chapters as well, so you can check that out. So go along, sign up for an announcement, and get a couple of free chapters. And yeah, I hope to see you at a book launch in the future.
Yeah,
That
definitely.
fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Till then, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.